Greetings people, my name is John and I am one of the team of the HOLLIE HOAX group. I want to talk to you today about the video you're looking at, but firstly I want to mention Mel V and Lou Collins. You'll need to excuse my voice, I'm not feeling too good at this moment in time. Okay, where am I? Okay, recently a number of our group were interviewed on Mel V's radio show, and a number of supporters of the HOLLIE Demands Justice group were asked to participate. They declined. We've also held an open Skype conversation with both Win and Sylvia, and again no one from the supporters side turned up. HollieDemandsJustice.org have had numerous opportunities to have a dialogue with us and directly with some of the accused. They've never accepted. In the earlier Lou Collins interview she did with Robert, partway through that interview we were treated to Lou's explanation of how she originally followed it on Facebook and got involved, or only got involved rather, because she had children and she wanted them to be free and not microchipped. That's her words. But the fact is, Lou, that you have a voice to the public. If you took that responsibility seriously, surely you would investigate what you advocate. The same can be said for Brian. Also, hopefully, you would both be somewhat impartial. You've always denied us the opportunity to speak on your show, to challenge the inconsistencies and blatant lies. After all the questions that have been raised, all you've done, Lou, is once again given Robert a platform to voice his and Anne's delusions. In that interview, Lou, you spoke of some big drama. I'm not sure what you was referring to, but you know, we never really realised that both you and Brian really live by that well-known journalistic motto, or it seems that you live by this motto: never let the facts get in the way of a good story, eh? Quite honestly, you both promote everything that's really bad about social media. I think personally you're both quite dangerous individuals. Promoting this case as you've done, spreading names across the internet suggesting they're paedophiles, could have really seriously endangered them. After this video that you're looking at the moment, one of our group, Sarah, asked Lou via email again if we could come onto her show. Now another one of our group has suggested that by attempting a dialogue with you guys, there's a danger we could kind of confer upon you an importance that you really just don't deserve, and I have to, I'm torn because I want to sort of sort this out, but I tend to agree with him. Lou, you said Brian would respond to us, so I think it's only fair that I read out Brian's response. I don't know why Brian has to respond, Lou. We asked you to come onto your show, not be interviewed by the UK column. We know that's never going to happen. But anyway, this is Brian's response. It's addressed to Sarah, or another member of our group, and he starts it with I we will not be engaging in any debate with you, since having spoken to you once on the telephone, you promptly lied about what I had said and not said in that conversation. Brian, that's a lie. I know Sarah, I know her well, and I know what you said to her in that conversation, and the problem is she broadcasted it and you didn't like it. I put it to you openly, Brian, you, sir, are a liar. You go on to say, furthermore, your whole aim now appears to try to be, I can't speak today, sorry about that. I'll start again. Furthermore, your whole aim now appears to be to try and discredit Anne and Holly Gregg, presumably to protect paedophiles in the establishment. I'll pause there. We're not trying to discredit Holly at all. Holly is a wholly innocent victim in this, as Detective Inspector Ali said in one of his correspondence. We are showing the truth about what Annie's saying. If that is to be judged as discrediting Anne, then yeah, we'll live by that. You go on to say, the fact of Holly's abuse and the facts of the case remain unchanged, as does our support for these two brave ladies. To that end, the truth about what has been done to Hollie and the blatant lies and cover-up by the Scottish establishment, the judiciary, the police, will be exposed. Happily, this process is speeding up as concerned individuals and whistleblowers in the establishment come forward, not only in regards to Hollie's case, but also with thousands of other children abused in the so-called state care system. Well, that's typical, Brian. You've always done it from day one. You've always tried to offer up Hollie's case against other, perhaps even genuine cases, in some vain attempt to give it credibility. It's just ridiculous, but I understand what you're doing. You finish off by saying, I cannot think of anything more sick than to try and dismiss Hollie's testimony of abuse as a hoax, or your vicious attempt to brand Anne as having mental problems because she has dared to fight for justice for her daughter. Kind regards, Brian Kerrish, Joint Editor, UK Column. Well, we are not, again, trying to dismiss Hollie's testimony, because it is not Hollie's testimony. It is the testimony of Anne. As far as Anne's mental problems go, geez, there's numerous published documents to show clearly Anne had mental problems. You don't run down the road past 12 o'clock at midnight in your night dress with no shoes on. Or is that, perhaps you do that the weekend, Brian? I don't know. Where do I start? Well, let's look at that. Anne ran down the road at after 12 o'clock at midnight in a night dress with no shoes on, and left her abused daughter behind. That's a bit strange, don't you think? Then, of course, we have all the issues about Anne stating that Hollie was left with, while she was in Cornhill Hospital, Hollie was returned to her abusive father. That was a lie. Dennis was working away. And this case is full of lies. And that's been proven now, obviously. Anyhow, there are a number of documents to show that Anne had mental problems. Even the testimony of some of the staff at the hostel where she and Hollie stayed, they were concerned. Her GP was concerned. Her new GP, because she left her old GP, he was concerned about her mental state. The list just goes on, it's endless. The fact is that really 99% of the population are blissfully unaware of you guys. Perhaps, I don't know, 90 or 95% in the case of Robert Green. But you guys have done irreparable damage to the good folk in the truth movement. Do you realise that? And the danger is, really, as I mentioned earlier, someone's going to get hurt, seriously hurt or killed, by what you guys are doing. Unprofessional is an understatement. Incompetent is completely justified for what you guys are. 99% of those unfortunate enough to be aware of you guys, seriously, they regard you as a laughingstock now. Yet there are those out there that will be fooled, and of course they'll press your donate button, won't they? That's another side of the story, isn't it? And Robert first came on the scene, all the videos, we don't want money, we want your help and time. Now there's donate buttons everywhere. But I don't want anybody to misinterpret us. You know, we know there are dishonest things happening in our world, and most avenues of our society. I want to read to you something that a friend of mine sent to me today, and he's another very well-informed individual. He talks about a bill that's just been passed or just been put forward in the US. It's called HR 6357. It's just been submitted, which aims to prohibit the extrajudicial killing of United States citizens by federal government. In other words, in the land of the free, they need to pass a law to prevent government from indiscriminately murdering its own citizens. You know, the mind really does boggle. And when you look, I don't know, in this country as well, I suppose it transpires over in other countries as well, but, you know, does a free society have hundreds of thousands of laws like we do? Codes, rules, regulations and policies which effectively criminalise nearly every aspect of our existence? Does a free society hunt down criminals and terrorists by treating its citizens like criminals and terrorists? Does a free society steal your money at virtual gunpoint to buy bombs and then drop them remote control on brown people in faraway lands? Does a free society debase its currency and plunder the purchasing power of its citizens? Does a free society saddle unborn generations with obligations they never signed up to bear? Does a free society award near total control of its economy, money supply and everything tied to it to a tiny elite few? And finally, does a free society brainwash its citizens into believing they live in a free society? You know, at least in China they know they're not free. We know what's going on in the world, guys. The difference is we demand the truth. Now let's stop the video and I'll interrupt it when I've got something to say. This is a pretty long-winded introduction. You can see Lou looking lovingly at Brian there, but Robert Greene doesn't really get on to say anything until about 1:18. So I'm going to fast forward it a little bit. I think if I can get this right, just bear with me.
The prison, and so this was the first opportunity we'd had to do an update, and I think you'll be fascinated by what he has to say. So, good afternoon, Robert. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, bro.
Okay, so we're just going to push it forward a little bit. There's nothing interesting. It's out there for you to read. Sorry, listen to. I'm going to move it up to about 106, 107, because it gets interesting just after that. Okay, here we go.
Particular where they're trying to expose corruption within our government and public services. So, if we just, perhaps for new viewers, Robert, can I just ask you to just give us a very quick little summary of how you came to end up in prison? What were you involved with?
Yes, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. When I came into the case, and obviously you will appreciate there are legal restrictions placed upon me, so I can't be quite as frank as I would like to be. But when I met the Greggs, Hollie and Anne Gregg, I was impressed by their courage and certainly in the case of Anne, her wonderful memory for everything that's gone on and all the documentary evidence, without which I could have not have proceeded with the case. Because the case is really all about documentary evidence.
Okay, he was impressed with them both and their courage, but he goes on to say he was impressed with Anne's memory, her wonderful memory. What's he inferring there? Does Hollie not have a wonderful memory? Because later in the video he states such. So that's just something I picked up. It might be something or nothing, but it's there for you to judge.
And the evidence was there from a number of experts, including Grampian Police's own forensic officer, Dr. Frances Kelly, that's a lady, and Detective Inspector Ian Alley, who had all said quite clearly that Hollie had been the victim of sexual abuse and that she was...
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, but I'm going to come back to this because he names more people than that as supporters of Hollie. It's important to remember what he's just said. He states that they all say that Hollie was a victim of sexual abuse.
A competent and honest witness.
Ah, yes, I apologise. He also states that Hollie was a competent and truthful witness. We'll come to that as well.
Having Down syndrome, I think people who perhaps don't know about the cases, some people with Down syndrome are not regarded as competent witnesses, but at Hollie's stage she is, and therefore is a perfectly viable witness. And again, people perhaps don't know about the condition is that people with Down syndrome have a tendency, an overwhelming tendency, to tell the truth.
Okay, we've heard this before, that Down syndrome children have an overwhelming tendency to tell the truth. I think we all have an overwhelming tendency to tell the truth personally, but it's simply not true with Down syndrome. There's some videos on the website, and the website's the holliegreggcoverup.net. One of them's by Psychodriller. He's got personal experience in his family of a Down syndrome child, and well, just listen to what he says. And I've met Down syndrome children. We've got a disabled child in our family. They are just like the rest of us. Some of them tell the truth. Some of them tell lies. There's no overwhelming tendency generalising all Down syndrome children. It's just not true.
They don't to fabricate things or imagine things or make things up in the way that the rest of us can, really. They just, if you ask them what happened maybe several years ago, and they do have very good and very vivid memories, far better than most people who don't have that condition.
Okay, so, sorry, let me get this screen just right here for you. So Robert's now suggesting that most people that don't have Down syndrome don't have as good memory. Again, I'd like to see the verifiable evidence for that, please.
And they can relate things very, very clearly indeed from years and years and years back. In the case of someone like Hollie, it's actually a curse, because when Down syndrome people are reliving these things, they're actually imagining that those things are happening to them all over again. So you can imagine in the case where a young woman has been sexually assaulted, if she's asked to talk about it again, it must be terribly disturbing for any young woman. But a young woman...
Which begs the question, why, Robert, did you drag Hollie all the way around the country? Why did her mother do that? To speak at different engagements? Why would you do that? Forcing her to relive these moments over and over again? Why take her onto Edge Media TV and ask her those questions? Why the other YouTube videos with other alternative media interviews as well? Why would you want to do that to your own daughter?
Who is actually having to relive the abuse again. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and I admire Hollie enormously for her tremendous courage. I would like to say that the second time that the investigation took place, and the time when I was present, was on the 8th of September 2009 in Shrewsbury. Hollie was interviewed by Detective Constable Lisa Evans of Grampian Police. Hollie spent 3.5 hours just alone as a competent witness, just with a couple of witnesses in the back, one from Shropshire Social Services and another police officer. I was in the same building, just in a room, just not quite in the same room, but with a very thin wooden partition. So I could...
Okay, I'll cut him off a little short there. Well, he's going to go on to say so he could hear everything. But this is the first time, really, we've heard Robert admit this. Previous to this, all he's stated is that he was there, he heard everything. We have published many, many times that he was not in the same room and that he was outside of the room, separated by a sliding door, which is the wooden partition he's referring to. Now, anybody that knows Hollie, and I've met Hollie personally, and anybody that's watched the numerous interviews that are on YouTube, you can see that Hollie has a speech impediment, a serious speech impediment, and it's very, very difficult to understand what Hollie says. Theo Chalmers on the Edge Media interview, on a couple of occasions, I think, asks what Hollie has said, looking at Anne for a response, and in fact it's quite amusing because on one occasion Anne actually changes what Hollie said, but nevertheless that's another point, another story. But it's virtually impossible to hear what Hollie is saying when you're some distance away from her, let alone behind a partition. Robert's going to go on to say that the conversation, I think, was in raised decibels. Well, this is a very private interview. And I don't believe the police would really want it overheard. And if the people that are doing the interview, the police, sit in the correct vicinity, they wouldn't even need to use raised decibels or raised voices. It's completely irrational what Robert is saying. But, you know, there's an answer to it. Release the transcript. Why don't you release the transcript, Robert? I'll tell you why. Because it completely shows Hollie has been coached. She named virtually everybody she knew, even a bus driver, for God's sake. But release it, Robert. If you want people to believe you, release it. We have it, but it was sent to us by nefarious means. We won't publish it. It's not for us to publish it. But you can. So, if you've got nothing to hide, release the transcript, Robert.
Hear everything that was going on, particularly as Hollie has speech and hearing difficulties, which means that the conversation was held in rather loud decibels. So I heard Hollie give all the information, which I'd heard her give before, very consistently, and she named the people concerned. Now, what is important for any possible people who may have any doubts at all, it isn't my opinion about whether Hollie is telling the truth, or indeed the opinion of most of the very loyal supporters. It doesn't really matter at all that. The opinion is that of the experts, and the experts have all verified this for her. Dr. Eva Harding, Dr. Jack Boyle, Dr. Paul Carter, Ruth Beckman of the Down Syndrome Association, Dr. Francis Kelly, who's Grampian Police's own forensic medical expert, and Detective Inspector Ian Alley of Grampian Police as well, who's testified to Hollie's truthfulness.
Okay, so what he's saying is they've all verified this for her. The experts have all verified this. They all state that Hollie was abused. Let's go through the experts one by one. Let's look at Dr. Carter. In the correspondence Dr. Carter wrote, he stated that Hollie was not showing any signs of inappropriate sexual experiences, and that both Anne and Dennis had inquired about contraception for their daughter. That's it. Nothing else. Nothing about abuse. Nothing. That's what he says. Let's look at Dr. Francis Kelly, the police forensics expert. Probably the most powerful piece of evidence. Dr. Kelly stated that Hollie's private parts had been penetrated. Hollie was not a virgin. That's it. Nothing about abuse. Doesn't support anything about abuse whatsoever. What we've got to remember here is nobody was informed that Hollie had a boyfriend. Hollie was positively encouraged to have boyfriends. I had a conversation with her brother, Greg, and he told me that his mother used to positively encourage her to have boyfriends. When she was forensically examined, she had a boyfriend at that time. There'd even been discussions, childish as it may be, about marriage. But it certainly doesn't show anything about abuse. Nothing. And when you think about the wider allegations, 22 people ring of, or 23 in one correspondence I've seen, and wrote to a police inspector that's on the website. You can read it for yourself. 23 people over 14 years of abuse. You know, you would think that there would be some kind of physical damage there. There's none. Let's move on. Ruth Beckman. Ruth Beckman, correspondence on the website. You can read it. All she does is state the same mantra that we hear Robert and Anne stating. That's it. There's nothing else in it. You know, she's not she's not saying with any degree of certainty she knows they were abused. She's just saying the same thing. She does give her opinion on how the police should work. I think she voices an opinion on a certain police officer who shouldn't have, apparently in her view, mentioned anything to a caseworker. But you know, that's her opinion. But it doesn't support anything. Let's look at Detective Inspector Alley. His correspondence, which again is on the website. You can read it for yourself. He's writing to Kicker about the Kicker payment. I encourage you to go to the website and read it for yourself, guys. In one part of that correspondence, he clearly states that I think I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head. If indeed it was Hollie's father that is guilty of this crime or whatever, that's not verbatim. Go and read it for yourselves. The wording is if. They don't know. They do talk about a balance of probability, but that's because Hollie was not a virgin. She was a vulnerable adult and not a virgin. They didn't know about the boyfriend either. And also, D.I. Alley talks about, Robert mentions about Hollie's truthfulness, competent witness, all that stuff. Well, again, go and read the correspondence. It states Hollie was a truthful, I think it says sincere witness to the best of her ability. And Robert never mentions that. Never. So D.I. Alley, again, doesn't support anything by the way of abuse. It talks about the balance of probabilities, certainly, but that's because that's how Kicker work. They're not interested in a crime. They're interested in in the victim and what the victim apparently, the injuries the victim has sustained. Well, in this case, it was based on mental injuries, because apparently she was abused, and the fact that she wasn't a virgin. Of course, Robert does go on to suggest that Dr. Harding's and Dr. Boyle's report was also sent to Kicker. Well, we don't know that's correct, but if it was, it's no wonder they paid out. Because let's talk about Dr. Harding's report for a moment. Dr. Harding's report is the only report that supports Hollie's allegations. But then why does it? If all the others don't, why does Dr. Harding's report stand out on its own? Well, let's look at Dr. Harding. It's unfortunate she's deceased, as is D.I. Alley, but we have to look at it. Dr. Harding was 68 years of age when she interviewed Hollie. She interviewed her twice, for an hour each time, and before the interview she spoke to Anne for 30 minutes. One could assume she was primed by Anne and then went in and spoken to a very well-coached Hollie. She'd got vast experience, I believe, of dealing with abused children, although she was not a medical doctor nor a psychiatrist. But in repeating the same mantra that Hollie has done during an hour's interview, it's obvious that Dr. Harding would come to the same conclusion that she's heard many, many times before. There's a side issue here as well, which I don't know if it's relevant, but it's pertinent, so it should be mentioned. Dr. Harding was trained at the Tavistock Institute. Now, there's a connection there, because when Robert went to the Houses of Parliament to speak there, there was a lady called Valerie Sinison there. Valerie Sinison is involved in satanic abuse of children in this country. And another gentleman called Wilfred Wong actually stated to Robert, or told Robert, to sex up the satanic abuse side of the Hollie Gregg case. Why would he do that? Now, he's the personal secretary of an MP, which we've also contacted. There's a bit of silence going on there at the moment. So Valerie Sinison was trained at Tavistock. Eva Harding was trained at Tavistock. I don't know. It's a connection. It needs to be mentioned. You guys can judge for yourself. The report by Dr. Jack Boyle. I have one page of that report. Robert has not made it public. Like most of the stuff Robert talks about, he doesn't make public. He just expects you to believe him. In the page that I've got, it does not support abuse. No, I don't have the other pages, so I simply can't comment. So out of all of those experts, Dr. Carter, Dr. Kelly, Ruth Beckman, Dr. Harding, Jack Boyle, D.I. Alley, one report, Dr. Harding's, supports Hollie. The rest simply don't.
And her competence. Right. So all those people support Hollie, and why? What we did learn for sure on the 8th of when my trial took place, D.C. Evans was brought before onto the witness stand as under oath, and she confirmed that she had never questioned any of those named by Hollie on the 8th.
Okay, let's look at that. D.C. Evans, under oath, has admitted that's the word, she had never questioned any of those named by Hollie. And of course that transpires, Grampian Police never investigated. Well, we know that in 2000, and Robert's going to go on to talk about this, that Dennis and Greg Mackey were interviewed. We know that when Robert was arrested, everybody else was interviewed. The children were interviewed. The children have made public statements to say that they didn't even know Hollie till much later in life, and that they were not abused. Of course, Hollie has stated that these children were abused along with her at the sheriff's sister's home. The sheriff, of course, doesn't have a sister. It transpired that that was a mistake, and that it was actually the sheriff's sister-in-law. Guess what? The sheriff's sister-in-law doesn't exist either. He has no sister-in-law. His brother Jack, apparently, well, that's not his name, and his wife Susie, That's not her name either. We do know the names of the sheriff's family, but we will not be publicising them because they will be persecuted without a doubt. So DC Evans was probably said it correct. She has never interviewed anybody named by Hollie. I don't know how that transpires into Grampian Police have never investigated. Because not only did they investigate in 2000, as I've just suggested, they did again in 2010. There's the PCCS report as well. How did that come about? That includes Anne's alleged complaint about her brother's estate and her not receiving, I don't know, the correct amount of money or whatever. That's in the PCCS report as well. How is this that they never investigated? It's ludicrous.
September 2009, despite the fact that in addition to all those people who support Hollie, the documents from Dr. Harding and from Dr. Boyle were actually sent to support an application to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. And the evidence was required sufficiently strong, and we know this doesn't necessarily need to a conviction in a criminal court. We are well aware that the burden is rather lower than that of proof, but they were sufficiently convinced by the two doctors' reports to be absolutely convinced in their mind that Hollie was a victim and made an award to her as a victim of £13,500.
Yeah, the video broke up a little bit there. Robert's talking about the kicker payment again there. He also states that the Harding and Boyle report was sent to Kicker as supporting evidence. We don't know that's true, but I mean, if it is, as I've suggested, it's no wonder that they paid out. He's ignoring D.I. Alley's correspondence there, which is, obviously, you can see it on our website, it's directly to Kicker. I would have thought that was more strong than the reports, but as that comes from the police itself. But it's no wonder that they paid out. But this is the first time we've heard Robert admit that the burden of proof is less for Kicker than it would be required in a court of law. It seems we've been saying that for so long, because obviously the Kicker payment always has been a major part of this, and many people just don't understand how Kicker work. All the evidence is there on our website. You can click the links, you can phone them up, do anything you want with Kicker. It's all there for you to see. They're not interested in the crime, they're only interested in the injuries the victim may have suffered, and in this case it was the loss of virginity and mental stress that Hollie would have suffered being abused. And that's it. Nobody knew about the boyfriend.
But all that supporting evidence was there, and yet the police refused to investigate or question a single person.
Okay, there you go, you've heard it again. The police failed to interview a single person. We know that's incorrect. We know in 2000 Dennis and Greg were interviewed, and then when he was arrested everybody else was.
Right, Robert,
yes.
If I just come in there, if I may, what I want to do is just encapsulate things for viewers and listeners. The basic facts of this case are that at the time a young Down syndrome girl is raped and abused and sexually assaulted by a number of individuals. Mm-hmm. This is eventually brought to the attention of the police, and what you've just described is that Hollie is interviewed by the police,
yes,
and she is also interviewed and assessed by other experts. Experts,
yes.
And then, despite these people saying collectively that yes, abuse had taken place,
now this proves something else. Brian is saying that he's agreeing with Robert that all those individuals collectively agree abuse had taken place. So he hasn't read it either. He hasn't read those reports. He could not have. He just could not have come to that conclusion if he had. And this is typical. When I spoke to Roger Hayes on Skype a while ago now, a very amiable man, and listened to what we'd got to say, went away, came back to me and said, yes, I think you've got some salient points. And he even sent me a message, I think the day before he was arrested in jail, saying that this case was not correct. He too admitted that he hadn't got time to investigate it, and he just believed it as well. But this is obviously what everybody has done, including Brian. In a conversation that we alluded to earlier that he had with Sarah, another one of our group, that's virtually what he told her. That he hadn't investigated it. Nobody has. And he's just admitted it there, because he's just repeating what Robert has told him in his encapsulation. What he's really doing, and he's going to go on to do, is correct Robert, because he knows people were interviewed. So he's going to go on to say that the police didn't do, I think he goes on to say, a full investigation. Very clever, Brian.
Point their evidence that this was the case, which supports obviously Hollie's own view. No full investigation was completed by the police. Is that the...
That is correct, and I think it's important again for people who are not, as you may, not familiar with the case. The case which I was, or the interview at which I was present, was actually the second of its kind. Hollie was first interviewed in 2000, but of course at that time I wasn't. It was long before I knew anything about the case, many years before. So I can't speak for that particular interview.
That's interesting, Robert, because it hasn't stopped you making numerous YouTube videos stating that Hollie was abused by a gang of paedophiles, high-ranking officials, high-ranking police officials. You've even stated in one video that the women accused, which we presume you mean Sylvia and Windragon Smith, Sylvia Major and Windragon Smith, you stated that the women held the children down while the men raped them. What a horrific imagination you seem to have. But you talked about it back then, but now apparently you can't. And of course, back then, you know, Hollie was abused with other children, and of course, they've now made statements to say that they weren't abused. Didn't even know Hollie till much later in life. So it's a bit bewildering why you can't talk about that now, Robert.
I am keen to mention this one on the 8th of September because I was there, I heard, and unlike the majority of people who may have opinions, I was there and I heard it all.
Right.
Ah, yes, of course, you heard it through the partitioned wall or the sliding door, as we understand it to be. Yes, of course.
And so, having got involved with Hollie and her mother, Anne, and you've been working to try and get the truth out,
yes,
and to try and get justice for
yes,
Hollie and her mother, of course, that has led you on a campaign trail, yes, which then has ultimately resulted in you being arrested and sentenced. So just tell us a bit about what were the key facts, what were the key events that were the cause of you subsequently appearing in court and then being sentenced.
Sure. Well, for quite a long time...
Robert's going to try and convince us now. Excuse me one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Robert's going to convince us now that the police should have removed computers. He's going to babble on about paedophiles having computers and downloading child pornography and all sorts. But he's fully aware that when the marital breakup took place between Anne and Dennis, Anne took everything. She took all the furniture, all the antiques. She took Dennis's mother's jewellery, and she took Dennis's computer. So I cannot understand why he goes on this ramble about computers, but listen to it yourself.
I was trying to get the story out by various means through the mainstream media and by the authorities and the police and so forth. I repeatedly said, you've got to do something. You've got to surely question these people. You know, we're not saying they're guilty, but there's enough evidence there to warrant a proper investigation. And in this type of case as well, I understand that computers are normally checked when these kind of allegations are made because obviously in questions of rape, there's always difficulty in sort of getting a conviction over rape. I'm well aware of that. But it's well known by police who are investigating alleged paedophile rings that the practitioners, the people who tend to abuse children, also tend to use child pornography on the internet, which is a criminal offence in itself, and of course is far easier to prove. So that is the normal procedure, but the police did not question the people, did not question how to look at their computers, and of course the other reason for looking at computers is it often shows links between perhaps a number of people who, the people who are named in the ring, if such a ring exists. Right, and we must say, if such a ring exists, nothing has been proven, but the thrust of this has always been for an investigation to take place.
Well, remarkable. It didn't stop you or Brian purporting all over the internet about this huge ring involving people in high positions of the judiciary. I'm not going to name them. But as I've mentioned, sheriffs and sheriffs' relations simply don't exist. Another one would be a high-ranking police official that I can name. That would be, you are referring to Terry Major, who was indeed a chief fingerprint expert. And in some of the questions that Ian McFerrin put to us recently, it was my mistake to report Terry as a fingerprint expert, not a chief fingerprint expert. So that was my mistake. I apologise for that. However, it makes absolutely no difference. You named him as a high-ranking police official. Terry Major, as the chief fingerprint expert, was a civilian employee. His status doesn't change. In many ways, it's semantical, whether I call him a fingerprint expert or chief fingerprint expert. He was a civilian employee. He was not a high-ranking official. Again, it just shows that nobody really investigated, and it's all based on hearsay and rubbish.
I'll go on a little bit more how it came about. On the 3rd of October 2009, I called a public meeting in Edinburgh. It was part of another meeting, but a public section of it invited everybody I had mentioned. If they want to come along, I was going to name people, because obviously the concern was that with this type of crime, and assuming it's a crime, there is the danger that the people who do perpetrate these kind of crimes continue. It's not something that people just do once and then they don't do it ever again. So there's, as I saw it, a continuing risk to the vulnerable people in the city of Aberdeen.
Robert Green, the public saint. Okay. Well, in a childish way, what he's explained is correct, of course. But of course, we still can't escape the fact that he sent letters to all the neighbours of the accused, ruining a business in the process. And not only that, their children will put their names into Google for years to come and see all manner of horrific things popping up. But Robert, you're such a saint, aren't you? I'm sorry, it doesn't cut it with me.
Again, I didn't get anywhere with the police or anyone. They still ignored everything I was trying to say to them. And in the end, I decided I would stand for election, for in the general election of 2010, for the constituency of Aberdeen South, where most of the offences, or the alleged offences, were said to have occurred. And I wanted to go there just to force the other politicians, who all, again, seemed to be terrified of actually saying anything about this case. And I wondered why there's such a sort of reign of terror that even responsible elected people in positions of authority, were terrified of even mentioning this case in any shape or form. So,
well, you've answered that yourself, Robert. They don't want to name innocent people as paedophiles. Surely you can see that. I don't understand how you can not. Of this reign of terror that you speak of, would be directly related to the fact that nobody goes out naming innocent people as paedophiles. And you yourself said that let me just check my notes. When you talked about a ring, you said nothing is proven, but it didn't stop you naming people. Well, if nothing's proven, how can you go out naming people as paedophiles? And then you're surprised when the media don't want to do the same.
I went to stand there. I arranged to meet people for the first time. I'd never been to Aberdeen before, on the 12th of February 2010.
Okay, that's interesting. Your admittance there that you'd never been to Aberdeen before then. But you've been heard many, many times stating that, that or using the phrase, my extensive investigations. How can you investigate if you don't go to the scene of the crime? I'm completely puzzled by that. But then we know that you didn't really investigate. The only thing you did was take Anne's word for it, hearsay, and you sent a letter to the sheriff asking if you knew any of these people. Of course he replied back to you. That was in 2009. He replied back to you saying, haven't got a clue what you're talking about, mate. But that didn't stop you, did it?
10:30 in the morning, just up the main street there, Union Street, and half an hour before I was due to meet the people and media as well, I'd invited them along, I was snatched by two plainclothes police officers, put in handcuffs, refused any legal representation, and held in prison in Queen Street Police Station in Aberdeen for 4 days in solitary confinement. And that is what we have in the United Kingdom at this moment.
Yeah, and this, of course, in a way mirrors what happened to Roger Hayes, because
Yes.
Roger Hayes was lifted by the police, arrested by the police at his home, and then the next thing he's straight into a police cell and taken.
Okay, just listen to the language. Lifted, snatched. Excuse me again. It's very flowery language, isn't it? What they actually mean is they were just simply arrested. Rightly or wrongly, they were arrested.
Taken from there directly into a court with no representation or jury. Okay, so that was the start of it, and then subsequently there were a number of hearings.
Yes.
At which you were accused of, amongst other things, breach of the peace.
Yes.
What were the charges against you?
Well, the charges really were that what I did do was at the end of 2009, because I was getting no support whatsoever and no one seemed to be acting in any way, I did send out leaflets naming the various members of the ring and those who named to be their victims.
Okay, excuse me. What does that mean? You sent out leaflets naming people involved in the ring. What does it mean? What is a leaflet? Actually, Robert, you were convicted of breach of the peace and also breaking your bail conditions, as you state. The breach of the peace was because you posted letters to the neighbours of the 22 alleged accused. That's what you did. You told all their neighbours that they were paedophiles. Sylvia Major lost a business because of it. And you did this with no evidence whatsoever. You stated nothing is proven, yet you sent out those letters.
I know I was taking something of a risk on that, but I thought in the public interest and because of the repeated failure of the Grampian police to investigate in any way, I felt...
Repeated failures of Grampian police to investigate in any way. But you've stated Hollie was interviewed in 2000, you've stated Hollie was interviewed again 2009, 10 was it, whatever. But repeated failures, okay.
That was the only real prospect open to me in the public interest, because obviously everything was being done to suppress this case at all levels.
Right. Okay. And are you able to give us any, keeping a little eye on the time, we've got about 9 minutes, a little bit of an insight into what happened in the final court case where you were subsequently committed to prison?
Yes, indeed. In the final, I think I should say first, this has some sort of connections with the Roger Hayes case and other cases as well. I say that Roger and all the other people who came to Aberdeen to demonstrate, it was fantastic as well, because we heard you in the prison and it was terrific. I forgot to say that, but thanks to all of you, and that includes Roger and many other people who travelled from all over Britain to demonstrate whilst I was in prison.
Yes, you've managed to fool quite a number, and those really are the only ones that are still following the case. Any sensible individual realises it's a complete hoax.
But as far as the case is concerned, there were 18 hearings. It's a record in Scottish legal history, I believe, and also the most expensive case of its kind in Scottish legal history. Not that the Scottish media in general had any interest in reporting it, because, oh, no, couldn't report it. Was it Holly Gregg's name comes up, and people might start looking at the internet and perhaps thinking, this is a strange case, but obviously the authorities in Scotland could not afford that to happen. And in fact, as I was going back to the Roger Hayes situation, I was arrested and charged in relation to solemn proceedings, which would meant I would have had a jury. And whilst I was being represented, one of the people who represented me as my senior counsel was perhaps most famous in Scotland, famous criminal defence lawyer in Scotland, Donald Finlay QC. However, once Mr. Finlay had become involved in the case, the authorities then decided to downgrade it to a summary offence, which means instead of having a jury, I would be tried by a single judge.
This is interesting because it's my understanding that, or it's our understanding rather, that Robert had a number of defence counsels, and he sacked a number of them as well, because virtually all of them suggested he should excuse me, he should plead guilty. So that needs to be kept in mind also, I would suggest.
Or sheriff, as they're known in Scotland.
Right. Okay. And what were the final charges given against you?
Yes. Well, the charges against me were that for my breach of the peace, and also for I was given 9 months for breach of the peace, and also an extra 3 months for breaching my my bail conditions over publicising the case.
Right. So we end up with a simple case that you have worked extremely hard now over a number of years to try and assist Holly and her mother. Yes. To actually get the truth out, and of course
yes.
There's many elements to this truth, because it's not only what exactly did happen to Holly and what she suffered, but we've also got this aspect of why the police have steadfastly refused to properly investigate, and
yes.
also
notice excuse me, notice Brian again suggests that the police steadfastly refused to properly investigate. He doesn't mention that people weren't interviewed. That's the mantra now that's going to be worked upon, that the police didn't do a proper investigation. How did the PCCS report come about? That includes Anne's allegation, as I mentioned earlier, about her brother's estate. How does any of this turn out to be not a full and proper investigation?
Why the Scottish establishment has put up such a wall of silence, really, in the case.
Yes.
It's been quite clear that
yes.
the Scottish establishment does not want to go near this case.
Well, it does, and it goes right to the top in Scotland. It doesn't just go to a high level in the judiciary or the legal system. It goes to Alex Salmond, because although, again, this was not reported in Scotland, the Alex Salmond and the Scottish ministers refused a request about the Hollie Gregg case, consistently refused to Her Majesty the Queen's official representative, the Freedom of Information Commissioner, Mr. Kevin Dunyan, in the summer of 2011. And in fact, the timing is not actually precise, but it would seem that the entire Scottish government was within 24 hours of facing criminal charges regarding contempt of court over the Freedom of Information Commissioner's failure to answer the Freedom of Information Commissioner's requests. Now, you would have thought, whatever the issue, that would have been a major story in Scotland, wouldn't you? But do the media mention it? Television, radio, newspapers? No.
Okay, well, we don't know what he's referring to. Excuse me. But if it happens to be the request put forward by Ian McFerrin to the Information Commissioner's office, then we still, if it's that one, we still don't know the outcome of that. I think that was talked about on holliedemandsjustice.org pretty recently. There was a request put in. No request came back, and it's still left in that fashion. So we have, if that's what he's talking about, we have no idea what the outcome of that is.
Scottish people are kept completely in the dark about this.
Well, this is a very common theme, and I think it's an important thing for us to raise on the show today, is that
Yes.
where serious questions are being asked of the performance of public authority, or indeed ministers or the judiciary,
Yes.
we are seeing this shut down by mainstream press and media.
Yes.
Obviously, in your own case, the BBC got involved, and
Yes.
then having said that they were, in Hollie's case,
Yes.
the BBC got involved, and then having said that they believed what she was saying and that they felt this was worthy of an investigative programme, they then subsequently pulled out.
Yep.
That's correct, Brian. Well done. Initially, they listened and they said, yeah, sounds great. We'll do a story on it. Then they investigated, Brian, which you never did, which Robert never did. And it was directly after Mark Daly interviewed Anne and Hollie, he knew this case was a hoax, was false. At that point, he was still of the opinion that perhaps Hollie had been abused, but singularly, perhaps by a family member. But he knew right back then the wider allegations were absolutely rubbish. And if those are rubbish, how can you have confidence in any of the other allegations also? Well, there's nothing conspiratorial in that. Initially they were interested. Upon investigation, they realised.
But we're seeing this mirrored in other cases of child abuse by children's services, that the mainstream papers will not take the story.
Yes.
We've had a case recently where ITN has backed out doing any form of investigation, and I've recently been asking questions of mainstream journalists about their coverage of the Leanne Smith story, because it's evident to the UK column staff that truth has not been told in relation to Leanne Smith's story.
And once again, all we're hearing here is Brian's attempts to link other cases to Hollie's in an attempt to give it credibility. There may be credibility in the other cases, but not in this case. Every case must be judged on its own merits, but not in the world of Brian Gerrish.
What happens is a wall of silence from the mainstream media, and indeed journalists who did report something at the time.
Yes, indeed.
So we don't quite know what it is that causes this silence, but it certainly seems that guilty people do not want the truth to come out, or they're protecting people.
Indeed, I do recall.
Correct, Brian. You don't want the truth to come out, do you? What you fail to realise is it's already reduced your credibility to zero, I'm afraid.
Well, going back a long time, there was a phrase that came out by leading politicians: who governs, about sort of militants on the extreme left of the trade unions, all this kind of thing. I think we have this same question should be asked again, but we're not looking at militants from the trade unions this time. We really want to...
Well, we're going to be treated to something interesting here. Just pause for a moment. Yes, Robert's going to suggest another wider conspiracy. Let's listen to what he's got to say.
Know who it is who is putting the pressure on the judiciary, on the police, on the media to keep these kind of stories quiet. Who is it? Who has the power to do that?
Yeah.
Who has the power to put pressure on the judiciary, media? What exactly is he talking about? Is he talking about, again, a satanic ring that controls Scotland, or maybe the country, and they're all into paedophilia? Oh, it sounds insane again to me, but listen on.
Why are leading supposedly investigative journalists, Greg, and certain other cases? What is...
I don't believe they're terrified. I think they're concerned about talking to people like you, Robert, and certainly Brian, that want to publish names of innocent people. But I don't think they're terrified at all. He didn't sound terrified when he interviewed you live on the Manchester Online radio show, did he, Robert?
Frightening them. Who is frightening them?
Well, one of the...
I think the public deserve to know.
I think you're absolutely right, and I was just going to add there, one of the things that we do know is that the moment any of these very disturbing and in many cases very mainstream press, before their own journalists or media, before any of their own people start investigating to find out at least some of the facts and substance to the story, what they do is immediately consult their own in-house legal team. Yes. And it would appear to me that the in-house legal teams are simply talking to higher authorities in the judicial system, and yes, they are then being told to get their noses out. Yes. So we are seeing media people, it doesn't matter whether it's Fleet Street journalists or local newspapers or BBC or major media, that the judiciary are somehow threatening them if you dare to carry on with publicity of this story. And I think this should be deeply worrying to the general public, because if we can hide the abuse of children and we can see guilty parties being protected under this wall of silence, our society is slipping into a very dark and dangerous place, in my opinion.
You see, the problem is there's lots of excuse me, negative influences that are happening in our government, in our judiciary as well. But to link them all to Hollie's case is completely ridiculous and irrational, as I've suggested. Brian will do that at every opportunity, of course, and he's doing so right now, and it's completely transparent.
I think you're absolutely right, Brian. I think we're getting close to the end of the interview. I'm aware of that, but I think obviously a lot of members of the public perhaps don't want to think about these stories. They sound too horrible in many ways, yeah, and I understand that very well. But I have to say to everybody that it could be your child next. It could be your grandchild, it could be your nephew, it could be your niece, it could be anybody. Everybody is at risk. No one can say that they're, while this regime apparently is controlling matters.
Yeah,
that's the little bit of fear that Robert is injecting into us all, that this regime, this fictional regime, whilst it's in power, all our children are at risk. Very good, Brian. Very good, Robert.
We should, protection of children should be such a fundamental issue that we should be searching out the truth, wherever there's a need for it. And at the moment,
how hypocritical is that? Searching out the truth. How many lies are involved in this case? Why would Robert and Anne state on the Edge Media interview that her brother had a fractured skull when the autopsy shows quite the opposite? How many other lies do you want us to point out? The sheriff's sister that didn't exist. The sheriff's sister-in-law that didn't exist. The children have made statements, as I've suggested, that they weren't abused, that they didn't meet Hollie till much later in life. How many more lies will it take before you really understand that you're not interested in the truth? All you're interested really is how many people will press that donate button.
Seeing is that the government and its agencies is basically quashing the truth and the facts
yes,
from appearing.
Yes, if I may just say, this isn't a case that's homophobic, so I'm not like that at all, but it's very odd that the Prime Minister seems to be promoting the cause of same-sex marriage. I'm not offering an opinion on that, but he has nothing to say against the stealing and the abuse against British children. Well, it doesn't seem to be a priority for him.
Well, Robert, I know exactly what you're saying, and I, of course, am not disagreeing with you, but I would think that we could put this a different way. I think that the Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron, is absolutely expressing a view on children, because by his silence, he is condoning the abuses that we are seeing.
You'll spin it any way possible to support gender, Brian. That's what I would say. You're now saying Prime Minister Cameron supports child abuse. How completely irrationally ridiculous is that? Simply by his what you would call acquiescence, I guess. Jesus.
And in addition to that, we've got some events. Yesterday, Justice Ryder produced the last part of his report, where he is talking about major reforms to the family courts, in which, far from opening them up and getting proper juries in so that we can actually see justice being done and all.
Well, the family courts are a real issue. They're a very, very difficult issue, and I don't propose to have the answers. But you want jurors in there and press and everybody else so we can see what's going on. I'm not convinced that that's the answer, Brian. There are personal and private things that happen within the family courts that no family is going to want publicised. Not at all. And maybe you have answers to that. Well, I don't know what they would be, but I'm not convinced opening up the family courts is the answer. Similarly, I'm not convinced more secrecy is the answer. It's a very, very difficult, emotive subject, but I'm sure you'll continue to use it in some way to give credibility to this ridiculous and irrational cause.
People can make that judgment. We are giving yet more powers to judges who sit in a court with no jury, no public and no press. So I think that really what we are saying, and we are beginning to shout quite loudly about this, we need the general public to wake up, because Mr. Cameron and Mr. Jan Oakley, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Justice, are actually creating ever more secretive courts around children, where of course these abuses can be swept under the carpet. And we've just got a couple of minutes to go. Can I ask you, Robert, what's your reaction to people at the moment? There's definitely a move on the internet and around some of the blogging sites. We're seeing quite a pernicious little group of people who are trying to undermine not only the good work that you've been doing, but also Hollie's campaign itself, by what they're suggesting is that nothing has happened to Hollie, the whole thing is a hoax, and it's absolutely disgraceful that people should stand up and try and point their finger at members of high society.
Excuse me. I don't think I've ever suggested that it's disgraceful to point the finger at anybody, let alone people in high positions of power or judiciary. So thank you for that, Brian. We're actually trying to stick up for the little people in this, the shopkeepers round the corner. Not necessarily the people in positions of power. They're quite able to look after themselves. So it's quite apt that you should attempt to discredit us that way.
Well, how would you answer these critics which we're seeing on the internet at the moment?
Well, I think it's just something very simple, and it's the way that I started the discussion. So this has been based on expert witness advice, medical, psychologists, police. It's not for me to say they believe Hollie, they believe these things have taken place, and are these people suggesting that they know more than proper experts who have been unchallenged by anybody throughout this case? Are they actually saying they know more than these people? I'd like to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're not. What we're saying is that we can interpret the reports correctly, truthfully, as I've pointed out. None of those experts, apart from Dr. Eva Hardy, of course, suggest that there's any abuse whatsoever. There's some supposition in some, but there's no hard facts or evidence at all. And if we look at the wider allegations of abuse over 14 years, as I've suggested, by a ring that you guys are still suggesting, where is the medical evidence? There isn't any. Where is the physical damage that would be obvious? How did Anne miss it for 14 years? There's so many questions. It's untrue. Too many to do in a short video like this, however.
Well, thank you very, very much for that, Robert. That we're going to be delighted to get you back in, hopefully back in the studio with us, so that we can have you here in person. I know at the moment you're still under restrictions as to where you can move.
That is so.
As part of your release from prison. But we're hoping to get you here into the studio where obviously we can go through matters in more detail. and for people who are interested in this story, and I believe it is a story of interest for every mum and dad and man and woman in this country. You need to know what has happened in the Hollie case.
Well, of course you do, Brian, because it supports your agenda of conspiracy and anti-authority and anti-government.
Look forward to getting you into the Plymouth studio with us. So on that note, thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to meeting up again with you soon. And also, of course, we will be interviewing Anne and Hollie as well, and we're going to do everything possible we can to help bring this campaign fully back into the spotlight. And to
well, that will be interesting. Let's hear what Anne and Hollie have to say. But I have to say that no genuine questions again were put to Robert and will be put to Anne, or not so much Hollie, because she is a completely innocent victim in this.
Ask the questions that still remain unanswered.
I think so, Brian. If I may say so as well, I would like to thank some of the MPs who have come forward to support this campaign. It isn't that everybody, when I indicate everybody is saying nothing, there are quite a number of brave and public-spirited elected officials who have come forward.
Yes.
They've been kind enough.
Yes, and we know who they are. Wilfred Wonga, actually, that I mentioned earlier, is the personal secretary of one of them. I won't name him, and the other one is the Birmingham MP. The Birmingham MP, we've had a number of email exchanges, a number of dialogues with him. He's fully aware of the misgivings of this case, although he does think that Robert was a little harshly treated with regards to his sentence. But there's absolutely nothing in it whatsoever. For a long time now, there's been accusations, allegations made that so many people are supporting this case. MPs, never named by Robert, never named by Brian. So many police whistleblowers coming in, never named, no evidence for it whatsoever. It's all conjecture, it's all hearsay.
To support this. We just need more of them. That's
well, and of course we should also say we're extremely grateful to say that they're extremely unhappy with what they know is going on.
Yes.
And of course they have given tremendous support to you and
Sure.
indeed the UK column.
Have they really? Well, that's really surprising. I'd like to know who they are. Let's talk to them, let's name them, because our website has been looked over by the police and they say it's absolutely factually correct as well. So tell us who they are. Let's have a dialogue with them, because the same mantra is consistently repeated time and time again. Again, it's just an effort to give it some kind of credibility.
Okay. And of course, finally, I think if I may interject just before we finish, inquiry, not to convict people without proper trial or anything like that would be.
An inquiry into what, Robert? In 2000, Hollie was interviewed. Other people were interviewed. There was no evidence. There remains no evidence. Further now, as I suggested, when you were arrested, other people were interviewed. That's a matter of record. There's public statements from children to say they were never abused. The lies that have been shown. What sort of inquiry would you want to waste the public's money on when it's clearly evident it's complete fabrication?
Totally wrong. All we've asked is for a proper inquiry to take place.
Absolutely. Okay, Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Brian.
There you go. You can listen to this and obviously make your own minds up, but please visit the website. It's the holliecoverup.net. It only views in Google Chrome. It's only coded for Google Chrome. It will display poorly in other browsers.